I am Margaret, 57 years old, and I never imagined I would be telling the story of how my husband missed our son's funeral. Our precious baby lived just 1 week before his tiny heart gave out. When I called Andrew in tears, he simply said, "I never wanted this child." The next morning, while I stood alone at our son's grave, he was boarding a plane with his secretary. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I found my way through the darkness to a strength I never knew I possessed. Before I begin my story, I would love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit like and subscribe, and prepare yourself for a journey through heartbreak that ultimately led to my unexpected redemption. I met Andrew Thompson 28 years ago at a corporate fundraiser in downtown Chicago. The glittering event was raising money for children's education, which is ironic considering how our story would unfold. I was 30, a marketing executive with a growing reputation for innovative campaigns. He was 32, a financial analyst with ambition practically radiating from him. I still remember his confidence when he approached me that evening. Tall, with salt and pepper hair that seemed sophisticated rather than premature. He had this charismatic smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. "Your campaign for Midwest Children's Hospital was brilliant," he said, somehow knowing exactly what would catch my interest. That was Andrew's talent, reading people, understanding their desires, and using that knowledge to his advantage. Our connection was immediate and intense. Within weeks, we were inseparable. His ambition matched mine, and we shared dreams of conquering the corporate world together. Neither of us mentioned children in those early conversations. Our focus was entirely on our careers, our next promotions, our investment portfolios. 8 months after meeting, we married in a lavish ceremony that made the business section of the Chicago Tribune. "Power couple weds," the headline read, and that's exactly how we saw ourselves. The early years of our marriage were focused on building our empire. We purchased a stunning home in Lake Forest, entertained influential people, and traveled to exotic locations. Children simply weren't part of the equation. When friends or family would ask when we planned to start a family, we had a rehearsed response: "Our careers are our babies right now." For many years, that answer satisfied us both. But as time passed, I began noticing subtle changes in our relationship. Andrew became increasingly consumed with work status and appearances. He was climbing the corporate ladder at Pinnacle Financial Group with remarkable speed, and each promotion seemed to take more of him away from me. By our 15th anniversary, we were living somewhat separate lives under the same roof. We still attended events together, still presented as the perfect couple, but the emotional intimacy had faded. Our conversations revolved around business, social events, and investments rather than our dreams, fears, or feelings. When I turned 50, something shifted within me. Perhaps it was the milestone birthday or watching my sister dote on her grandchildren, but I found myself yearning for a child. The desire surprised me at first. After all, I had never considered myself particularly maternal, but once the idea took root, it grew stronger each day. At first, I kept these feelings to myself, unsure how to broach the subject with Andrew after 25 years of building a child-free life. When I finally gathered the courage to mention it during a rare quiet dinner at home, his response was immediate and harsh. "Have you lost your mind, Margaret?" he asked, putting down his fork with a clatter. "We're too old for children. I'm 59 for God's sake." "There are options," I said carefully. "IVF, surrogacy, even adoption." "This isn't about options," he said, his voice cold. "It's about the life we've built. Children have never been a part of our plan." But something in me wouldn't let the idea go. Over the next several months, the desire only grew stronger. I researched older mothers' success rates of IVF for women in their 50s, the costs, and procedures. I brought it up repeatedly, each conversation ending in a more heated argument than the last. "This obsession isn't healthy," Andrew said during one particularly bitter fight. "You need to accept that the window for having children has closed." "It hasn't, though," I insisted. "Women are having children later now. There are treatment specialists." "And what about me?" he demanded. Have you considered that I don't want to be changing diapers when I should be retiring? That I don't want to be attending high school graduation in my 70s? The truth was, I hadn't fully considered his perspective, but the maternal yearning had become so strong that I couldn't ignore it. After nearly a year of arguments and researching, I finally issued an ultimatum that shocked us both. I want to try IVF, I told him one evening. If you won't consider it, then perhaps we need to reevaluate our marriage. The threat of divorce was never something I had wielded before, and I saw genuine surprise in his eyes. After several tense days of minimal communication, he reluctantly agreed to a consultation with a fertility specialist. Looking back, I should have recognized his agreement for what it was. Not a change of heart, but a tactical retreat from a man who never planned to actually follow through. The journey through IVF was far more difficult than I had anticipated. Our first consultation was clinical and sobering. The doctor, a woman in her 40s with a kind but realistic demeanor, didn't sugarcoat our chances. At 56, your own eggs are unlikely to result in a viable pregnancy, she explained. Donor eggs would be your best option, but even then the process is challenging and success rates are lower than with younger women. Andrew sat beside me, his body language closed and resentful. He asked pointed questions about costs and risks, focusing particularly on the financial aspects. When the doctor stepped out momentarily, he turned to me. Are you really willing to put us through this? The expense, the hormones, the physical toll on your body. I met his gaze steadily. Yes, I am. That first round of IVF failed. So did the second. Each negative pregnancy test felt like a personal failure, though the doctor had prepared me for the likelihood. Andrew's support waned with each attempt. What little enthusiasm he had shown initially disappeared entirely by the third try. How much more money are we going to throw at this? He asked after the third failed implantation. This is becoming financially irresponsible. Coming from a man who thought nothing of spending $60,000 on a watch, the comment stung sharply, but I persisted. Something deep within me wouldn't let go of this dream even as it took a physical and emotional toll. The hormone injections left me bloated and emotional. The procedures were uncomfortable and invasive. The roller coaster of hope and disappointment was exhausting. Through it all, I noticed Andrew pulling away even further. His late nights at the office became more frequent. He started taking business trips that hadn't been on his calendar the week before. When he was home, he was distant, often working in his study until I went to bed. Then came our fourth attempt. I had switched to a more aggressive clinic with higher success rates for older women. The process was even more intensive, the medication protocol more complex. And miraculously, it worked. 2 weeks after the embryo transfer, I sat in my bathroom staring at a positive pregnancy test, tears streaming down my face. When I told Andrew that evening, his reaction was tepid at best. He offered a perfunctory congratulations and immediately began talking about the financial implications and how this would affect our lifestyle. There was no joy, no excitement, no shared moment of wonder. As my pregnancy progressed, Andrew's behavior became increasingly suspicious. He hired a new executive assistant, Veronica Jackson, a striking woman in her early 30s with impeccable credentials and a habit of calling our home during dinner hours with urgent work matters. She's just thorough, Andrew said dismissively when I questioned the necessity of these calls. This project we're working on is critical to the Bahamian expansion. My pregnancy was classified as high risk due to my age. I developed gestational diabetes and had concerns about my blood pressure. My doctor recommended reducing stress and focusing on my health, so I took a leave of absence from my position at the marketing firm. This left me with more time at home, more time to notice the subtle shifts in Andrew's behavior. The late-night texts that made him smile, the weekend emergency meetings that couldn't be rescheduled, the new cologne he suddenly started wearing, the unexplained charges at restaurants I knew he disliked but were conveniently located near Veronica's apartment. I confronted him once about my suspicions, and his denial was so vehement, so seemingly sincere that I questioned whether my pregnancy hormones were making me paranoid. He made me feel foolish for even suggesting he might be unfaithful, and in my vulnerable state, I backed down. At 32 weeks, my water broke unexpectedly. I called Andrew in a panic, but the call went to voicemail. I called his office and was told he was in a meeting. I finally called an ambulance myself and was taken to the hospital alone, terrified for my baby, who was coming much too soon. Michael Andrew Thompson was born weighing 3 pounds and 6 ounces. He was immediately taken to the NICU, his tiny body connected to tubes and monitors. Andrew arrived at the hospital 5 hours later, claiming he'd been in a meeting with his phone off. "Is it going to make it?" he asked the doctor, not even using our son's name. I should have seen it then, the complete emotional detachment, but I was too focused on our fragile baby boy fighting for his life. The NICU became my second home. I spent every possible moment beside Michael's incubator, talking to him, singing softly, telling him how loved he was. The nurses encouraged skin-to-skin contact when possible, and those precious moments with his tiny body against my chest are memories I will cherish forever. Andrew visited sporadically, always with excuses about critical work situations. When he did come, he stood awkwardly at the edge of the room, barely looking at our son, constantly checking his phone. More than once, I saw Veronica's name flash on his screen. "Could you at least pretend to care about your son?" I asked him during one particularly brief visit. "I'm working to ensure his future," Andrew replied coldly. "Someone has to pay for all this." Our insurance covered the hospital costs, and we were more than financially secure. His excuse was as transparent as it was cruel. Michael had good days and challenging ones. The doctors were cautiously optimistic but warned me about the complications premature babies often face. I clung to hope, celebrating each small victory. When he gained an ounce, when his oxygen needs decreased slightly, when he opened his eyes and seemed to focus on my face. On his 7th day of life, I arrived at the NICU for my morning visit. The nurse met me with a concerned expression. "Michael had a difficult night," she said gently. "His respiratory function has declined, and the doctor wants to speak with you." Fear clutched my heart as the neonatologist explained that Michael had developed an infection and his fragile lungs were struggling. They were increasing his support and starting antibiotics, but his condition was serious. I called Andrew immediately. No answer. I texted, "Michael is critical. Come now." No response. I sat by our son's incubator watching the numbers on his monitors, willing them to improve. The medical team moved with increasing urgency around him. More doctors were called. The atmosphere grew tense. "His oxygen levels are dropping," someone said. "We need to intubate again." I was asked to step out during the procedure. In the hallway, I called Andrew repeatedly. Nothing. I left voicemails, each more desperate than the last. I called his office and was told he was unavailable. I even called his secretary directly, but the call went to voicemail. When I was allowed back in, Michael's condition had deteriorated further. His tiny body was losing the battle. The doctor placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry, but Michael is not responding to our interventions. His infection has caused septic shock, and his organs are failing. I think it's time to consider whether continuing aggressive measures is in his best interest." The world stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was look at my beautiful, perfect son, his chest rising and falling with the help of machines. "Can I hold him?" I asked through tears. "If it's time, I want to hold him." They carefully disconnected the machines, wrapped my tiny son in a soft blanket, and placed him in my arms. For the first time since his birth, I could hold him without wires and tubes. I sang to him softly, told him how much he was loved, how perfect he was, how sorry I was that I couldn't protect him. Michael took his last breath in my arms at 3:42 in the afternoon. A part of me died with him. Andrew finally appeared at the hospital nearly 4 hours later. I was still sitting in a private room they had provided, holding Michael's body, unable to let go. "I'm sorry," he said, though there was no real emotion in his voice. I was in meetings all day and just saw your messages. He didn't come close, didn't ask to hold his son, didn't shed a tear. He stood near the door, still in his business suit, checking his phone every few minutes. The hospital chaplain who had sat with me was more of a comfort than my husband of 28 years. She helped me begin to process the unthinkable task of planning a funeral for my week-old son. Andrew left after less than 30 minutes, claiming he needed to make arrangements and would see me at home. I spent the night in that hospital room holding Michael until his body grew cold, memorizing every detail of his perfect face, his tiny fingers, the shape of his ears. The nurses, understanding my need for this time, checked on me periodically, but gave me the space to say goodbye. By morning, I knew I had to let him go. A kind funeral director came to the hospital and, with more compassion than I thought humanly possible, helped transfer my precious boy. I returned to our empty house alone, my arms aching for the weight of my child. Andrew wasn't there. I showered and dressed for my son's funeral in a daze. The black dress I put on hung loosely on my postpartum body. I kept calling Andrew's cell phone. No answer. As the minutes ticked closer to the service time, panic began to rise. Finally, an hour before the funeral was set to begin, he answered. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. "We need to leave soon." There was a moment of silence before he spoke. "I'm not coming, Margaret." I thought I must have misheard. "What do you mean you're not coming? It's your son's funeral." "I never wanted this child," he said, his voice cold and detached. "This was your dream, not mine. I can't sit through a funeral pretending to grieve for a baby I never wanted in the first place." The cruelty of his words stole my breath. "Andrew, he was your son. He lived. He had a name. Michael. Your name is his middle name." "A mistake," he said. "This whole thing was a mistake. You pressured me into it, and now you want me to pretend I'm heartbroken." "You're his father," I whispered, shocked beyond tears. "Biology doesn't make me a father," he replied. "I made my position clear from the beginning. You chose not to listen." The call ended. I stood in our bedroom, phone in hand, trying to process what had just happened. How could the man I'd spent nearly 3 decades with be so cruel, so heartless? Somehow I made it to the funeral. My sister flew in from Denver and met me there. A few close friends came. Some of the NICU nurses attended. The service was brief but beautiful. A tiny white casket, white roses, a poem about angels. I moved through it all like a ghost, part of me still unable to believe this was real. When I returned home, the house was still empty. A note on the kitchen counter read simply, "I need some space. We'll be back in a week." No condolences, no apology, not even his name. I spent that night curled around the teddy bear we had bought from Michael's crib, sobbing until there were no tears left. I grieved not only for my son, but for the marriage I now realized had been an illusion. The man I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, none of it was real. Morning came, and with it a hollow determination to understand what was happening. I called Andrew's office and asked to speak with him. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," his administrative assistant, not Veronica, said. "Mr. Thompson is out of the office on personal leave for the week." "Do you know where he is?" I asked. "It's an emergency." "I believe he mentioned needing some time off for a family matter," she said, her tone sympathetic. She clearly assumed he was grieving our son. "When did Veronica last come into the office?" I asked, following a hunch. "Oh, she's also taking personal time this week," the woman said, then added hastily, "I'm not supposed to discuss other employees' schedules." "I understand," I said. "One last question. Did either of them mention where they were going?" There was a pause. "I'm really not supposed to say, but I did have to rearrange a meeting because Mr. Thompson mentioned something about the Bahamas. I assumed it was for the resort development project." After hanging up, I went to Andrew's home office. We had separate computers, but I knew his passwords, or at least I thought I did. The main one didn't work. He had changed it, but his backup password, our anniversary date, still worked on his email. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Hotel confirmations for the Royal Bahamian Resort, first-class tickets for two, restaurant reservations, a couple's massage, all scheduled to begin the day after our son's funeral. While I had been burying our child, my husband was flying to a tropical paradise with his secretary. I dug deeper and found months of emails between them, intimate messages, plans, promises. The affair had been going on for over a year, possibly longer. In one particularly painful exchange from during my pregnancy, Veronica had asked when he was going to deal with the situation. His response, "Once the baby comes, I'll end it. She'll be too distracted to fight me on the settlement terms." I sat in his office chair, printouts of their correspondence spread before me, and felt something shift inside me. The overwhelming grief was joined by something else, cold, focused anger. For decades, I had been a successful businesswoman before scaling back my career to support Andrew's. I had negotiated million-dollar deals, managed teams of dozens, outmaneuvered competitors. It was time to apply those skills to my personal life. I gave myself 1 week to process the dual trauma of losing my son and discovering my husband's betrayal. I allowed the grief to wash over me in waves, acknowledging the pain rather than fighting it. But each day, I also spent time planning my response. On the third day, I called Diane Levinson, a friend from business school, who had become one of the top divorce attorneys in Chicago. I laid out everything that had happened, sparing no details. "Margaret, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with genuine compassion, "for your loss and for this betrayal. What he's done is unconscionable." "I want everything," I said simply. "After what he's done, I want him to lose everything." "Then we need to be strategic," Diane advised. "Illinois is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. The court will consider his infidelity, but we need more than just evidence of the affair. We need to show financial misconduct as well." Over the next few days, I gathered records, bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds. I discovered accounts I had never known about, transfers to offshore holdings, a pattern of financial deception that had apparently been going on for years. While conducting this financial autopsy of our marriage, I also reached out to contacts at Pinnacle Financial Group, where Andrew had worked for over 2 decades. Linda, who had been my assistant before I scaled back my career, now worked in human resources there. "I've heard rumors," she admitted when we met for coffee. "Andrew and Veronica haven't been particularly discreet. Several people have seen them together outside of work." "How long?" I asked. "At least a year, possibly longer," Linda said. "There's something else you should know. Andrew is being considered for the CEO position when Reynolds retires next year. It's between him and Thomas Blake." Thomas Blake. The name triggered a memory. Thomas and I had worked together at Martin & Associates before I met Andrew. We had been good friends, even briefly dated before deciding we were better as colleagues. He had moved to Pinnacle about 5 years ago after a stellar career at several top firms. "The board is concerned about Andrew's image," Linda continued. "They're looking for a family man with solid values to lead the company forward. He's been presenting himself that way, talking about his excitement about becoming a father again later in life." The hypocrisy was staggering. While telling me he never wanted our child, he had been using my pregnancy to bolster his professional image. That evening, I made a call I should have made months ago. "Thomas Blake," the familiar voice answered. "Thomas, it's Margaret Thompson." "Margaret, it's been too long," he said warmly. "I heard about your baby. I'm so sorry for your loss." His sincere sympathy brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Thomas. I'm afraid I'm calling with an unusual request. I need to meet with you privately about something concerning Pinnacle." There was a brief pause. "Of course. Does tomorrow work? I could meet you for breakfast before coming into the office." The next morning, in a quiet corner of a cafe far from Pinnacle's offices, I told Thomas everything. The pregnancy, Andrew's reluctance, his absence during Michael's final moments, the missed funeral, The Bahamas trip with Veronica. Thomas's expression grew increasingly grave as I spoke. When I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. I knew he was having an affair with Veronica, but I had no idea about the rest, he said. Margaret, this goes against everything Pinnacle stands for as a company. We have strict policies about workplace relationships, especially between executives and their direct reports. And the timing of this trip, he shook his head in disgust. I'm not asking you to fire him, I said, though the thought had crossed my mind. What are you asking? I thought for a moment. I want him to face consequences, both personal and professional. He thinks he can discard our son, betray our marriage, and still become CEO. I want to show him he's wrong. Thomas nodded slowly. I have an idea, but I'll need your help, and it will require perfect timing. By the time I left the cafe, we had a plan. I wouldn't file for divorce immediately. Instead, I would wait for Andrew to return, confront him with what I knew, and let Thomas handle the professional consequences. For the first time since Michael died, I felt a flicker of something other than grief and betrayal. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was purpose. Thomas Blake's office at Pinnacle Financial Group was impressive, befitting his position as Chief Operating Officer and potential next CEO. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Chicago skyline, while the massive desk and conference table spoke of power and authority. It was at this conference table that I sat on Monday morning, reviewing the documents Thomas had provided: company ethics policies, financial reports, and evidence of Andrew's professional misconduct that went beyond his affair. The picture they painted was of a man who believed the rules didn't apply to him in his marriage or his career. Thomas had arranged everything perfectly. Andrew and Veronica were scheduled to return from their Bahamas trip that morning. Neither knew I had discovered their affair, or that Thomas was aware of their relationship. They certainly didn't know I would be waiting in the executive boardroom. Are you sure you want to do this? Thomas asked, standing by the window. No one would blame you for handling this privately. I straightened the documents before me. Some betrayals deserve a public response. At precisely 10:30, Thomas's assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Thompson has arrived at the building, sir. Thank you, Janet. Please inform him there's an urgent meeting in the executive boardroom regarding his CEO candidacy. Tell him Mr. Reynolds requested his immediate presence. And Miss Jackson, have her report to the boardroom as well 15 minutes after Mr. Thompson. Thomas turned to me. Are you ready? I nodded, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I'm ready. I'll be next door. Come get me when it's time for phase 2. As Thomas left through a side door, I took my position at the head of the table in the chair typically reserved for the CEO. The minutes ticked by slowly until I heard the main door open. Andrew walked in, a confident smile on his face that froze the instant he saw me. His tan from the Bahamas highlighted his shocked expression. Margaret, what are you doing here? He glanced around nervously. Where's Reynolds? I remained seated, my expression neutral. He's not coming. Neither is Thomas. This meeting is with me. Andrew's expression shifted from confusion to anger. How did you get in here? This is highly inappropriate. I'm going to call security. Before you do, I said calmly, you might want to look at these. I slid a folder across the table. Warily, he approached and opened it. Inside were printouts of his emails with Veronica, hotel confirmations, flight itineraries, all dated during the week of our son's death and funeral. The color drained from his face. You hacked my email. That's illegal. Interesting. That's your first concern, I observed. Not that you abandoned me during the most painful experience of my life. Not that you were in the Bahamas with your secretary while I buried our son alone. He straightened his tie, visibly trying to regain composure. Margaret, you're clearly emotional right now. We can discuss this at home. This is a private matter. Is it? I asked, sliding another folder toward him. Because it seems your private affair has been conducted largely on company time, using company resources, emails sent from your work account, hotel rooms charged to the corporate card. Those charges will be reconciled, he said dismissively. This is a misunderstanding. Like when you told your secretary you never wanted our son, that he was a mistake you'd deal with after the birth. Was that a misunderstanding too? Andrew's expression hardened. Fine. You want the truth. I never wanted a child at my age. You pressured me into it. You became obsessed with the idea. What was supposed to happen after I'd be changing diapers at 60, attending soccer games at 70? It was a ridiculous fantasy. His cruelty no longer had the power to wound me. I had already seen him at his worst. And Veronica? I asked. How long has that been going on? The door opened before he could answer, and Veronica herself walked in. She stopped short when she saw me, her eyes widening. Mrs. Thompson, she said, glancing nervously at Andrew. I didn't realize you would be here. Clearly, I replied. Please join us. We were just discussing your trip to the Bahamas. Veronica looked panicked. I should go. This seems like a private conversation. Stay, I said firmly. Since you've been involved in my marriage for over a year, you might as well be part of its end. She reluctantly took a seat as far from Andrew as possible. I turned back to my husband. To answer the question you're too cowardly to ask, yes, I'm filing for divorce. Diane Levinson will be contacting your attorney. I suggest you find a good one. Andrew's expression shifted to calculation. Fine. We'll divide the assets equally and move on. I smiled for the first time. Oh, I don't think it will be that simple. I pushed another folder toward him. These are records of the accounts you've been hiding. The property in Lake Tahoe under your brother's name. The offshore holdings in the Caymans. His face went pale. How did you? I'm not the trophy wife you seem to think I am, Andrew. Before I scaled back my career to support yours, I ran a multi-million-dollar division. I know how to follow a money trail. I turned to Veronica. Did he tell you he had a newborn son in the NICU when you were planning your romantic getaway? Did he mention he was missing his child's funeral to be with you? Her shocked expression and sudden tears told me everything. A funeral? No. He said you were having a simple private service later. He said you agreed he should take some time away because you needed space. He lied, I said simply. My son, our son, died after just 1 week of life. I held him as he took his last breath. I called Andrew repeatedly that day, and he never answered. He refused to attend the funeral, saying, and I quote, I never wanted this child. Veronica covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Andrew slammed his hand on the table. Enough, Veronica, don't listen to her. She's twisting everything. I stood and walked to the side door. I think it's time for phase 2. I opened the door, and Thomas walked in, followed by Harold Reynolds, the current CEO, and 2 members of the board of directors. Andrew's face went from anger to panic in an instant. Harold, this isn't what it looks like. My wife is upset. She's grieving. She's not thinking clearly. Harold Reynolds, a distinguished man in his late 60s, regarded Andrew with cold disappointment. What it looks like, Andrew, is that you violated several company policies regarding workplace relationships. What it looks like is that you abandoned your wife during the loss of your child to vacation with your secretary. What it looks like is that you've been misrepresenting yourself to this company for years. This is a personal matter, Andrew insisted. It has nothing to do with my work here. Character has everything to do with leadership, Reynolds replied. The board was preparing to announce your selection as my successor next week. That will no longer be happening. Andrew's face contorted with rage. Because of a personal indiscretion, this is absurd. Thomas has probably had affairs, too. Thomas stepped forward. I have not. But more importantly, I haven't created a hostile work environment through an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. I haven't used company resources to conduct an affair, and I certainly haven't abandoned my family in their time of greatest need. One of the board members, a woman I recognized as Patricia Winters, addressed Veronica. Ms. Jackson, please report to HR immediately. There will be an investigation into this matter. Veronica nodded tearfully and left the room without looking at Andrew. I stood and gathered my folders. With steady hands, I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the table. 28 years, I said quietly. 28 years, I supported you, believed in you, loved you. When I needed you most, you weren't just absent. You were cruel. You called our son a mistake while I was still wearing the hospital bracelet they gave me when he died. You have no idea what you've thrown away, and you never will. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Andrew, I'd start looking for a new place to live. The house is in my name. This wasn't entirely true. We owned the house jointly, but the shocked expression on his face was worth the small deception. Diane would sort out the details later. As I walked out of Pinnacle Financial Group for the last time, my grief for Michael remained a constant ache. But alongside it was something new. The first tentative steps toward reclaiming my life. The months following that confrontation were the hardest of my life. Grief doesn't follow a predictable path. It ambushes you when you least expect it. When you pass a mother with a stroller, when you see baby clothes while shopping, when you wake up from dreams where your child is still alive. I created a small memorial garden for Michael in the backyard of what was now truly my home. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly with Andrew eager to settle once he realized how much evidence I had of his financial misconduct. The settlement was generous, giving me the house, half of our visible assets, and a substantial portion of the hidden ones Diane's forensic accountant had uncovered. Andrew lost more than his marriage and money. The board at Pinnacle terminated his employment after their investigation revealed multiple ethics violations. His reputation in financial circles was tarnished. Veronica left the company voluntarily, and from what I heard, ended their relationship shortly after learning the full truth. But material victories did little to heal the hole in my heart. The nursery remained untouched for weeks, the tiny clothes still folded in drawers, the crib made up with sheets never slept in. I couldn't bear to dismantle it, but neither could I walk past that room without breaking down. It was my sister who finally helped me take that step. She came to stay with me for a month and gently suggested we transform the nursery into a memorial space. Not to forget him, she explained, but to honor him in a way that brings peace rather than fresh pain every time you see the door. Together, we created a peaceful room with a comfortable chair, bookshelves, and a small table holding Michael's memory box, his hospital bracelet, a lock of his hair, hand, and footprints, the teddy bear that had been in his incubator. On the wall, we hung a custom star map showing the night sky on the day he was born with his constellation highlighted. This room became my sanctuary during the darkest days. I would sit in the chair, sometimes talking to Michael, sometimes just sitting in silence, processing my grief, one breath at a time. A month after the divorce was finalized, I joined a support group for parents who had lost infants. The stories I heard there, of loss, resilience, and gradual healing, gave me hope that I too might find a way forward. The group was facilitated by a compassionate grief counselor who helped me understand that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the grief differently. You don't get over the loss of a child, she explained. You learn to integrate that loss into your life story. The grief changes shape and weight over time, but it remains a part of you. As I approached the 6-month anniversary of Michael's death, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I would use a portion of my settlement to establish a foundation for bereaved parents, focusing particularly on those who had lost children in the NICU. The Michael Thompson Foundation would provide financial assistance for funeral expenses, counseling services, and practical support for families navigating the devastating loss of a newborn. It would also fund research into preventing premature birth complications and improving NICU care. Working on the foundation gave me purpose. I reached out to the nurses and doctors who had cared for Michael, many of whom enthusiastically offered their expertise. I connected with social workers specializing in grief and loss. I began volunteering at the NICU, where Michael had spent his brief life speaking with parents facing similar challenges. Gradually, imperceptibly, I began to heal. Not completely, never completely, but enough to function, to find meaning, to occasionally smile without feeling guilty. I made new friends through the foundation and the support group. I reconnected with colleagues from my marketing days who helped me develop the foundation's public presence. Thomas Blake and I maintained contact as well. He had been named CEO of Pinnacle and instituted sweeping changes to the company culture. He became one of the foundation's most generous donors and eventually a close friend. 3 years after losing Michael, I received an unexpected message from Veronica. She wanted to meet to apologize in person for her role in what had happened. I was hesitant, but ultimately agreed. Over coffee at a neutral location, she shared her side of the story. How Andrew had pursued her aggressively, claiming his marriage was already over in all but name. How he had lied about the situation with Michael. How devastated she had been to learn the truth. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "What I did was wrong regardless of what Andrew told me. I just wanted you to know that I think about your son often, and I'm truly sorry for adding to your pain during that time." Her sincerity surprised me. I found myself able to say, "Thank you for telling me that," and mean it. As for Andrew, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had struggled to rebuild his career. The financial industry is surprisingly small, and word had spread about both his personal and professional misconduct. He eventually relocated to Phoenix and took a position well below his previous level of seniority. We haven't spoken since the day in the boardroom. People sometimes ask if I've forgiven him. The truth is complicated. I've released the active anger that once consumed me, not for his sake, but for my own. Carrying that rage was exhausting, and it didn't serve me or Michael's memory. But forgiveness doesn't mean I excuse what he did or would ever welcome him back into my life. The foundation has grown beyond my initial vision, helping hundreds of families and funding promising research initiatives. Through this work, Michael's brief life continues to have meaning and impact. Each family we help, each parent who finds solace through our services, honors his memory. I still visit his garden every morning. I still maintain his memorial room. I still feel the ache of his absence on his birthday and the anniversary of his death. But alongside that grief, I've built a life with purpose, connection, and even moments of joy. If there's anything I've learned from this journey, it's that healing isn't a destination, but an ongoing process. Some days are harder than others. Some triggers still bring me to my knees. But I found strength I never knew I possessed and created meaning from the deepest loss imaginable. I hope by sharing my story today, someone watching might find comfort in knowing they're not alone in their pain or courage to face their own betrayals. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after loss or betrayal? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible even after unimaginable pain. Thank you for listening, and remember, the depth of our grief reflects the depth of our love, and neither is something to be ashamed of.